All right, so to start talking today, I figured we could talk about work and jobs. I kind of mentioned this last week, um, and it was a subject I actually kind of wanted to avoid because I think it's something that, well, I get pretty heated about talking about. How do I phrase this? I get kind of heated when I'm talking about work and jobs and things like that, largely because, well, it just sucks. And I think that probably the vast majority of people out there can relate to this pretty heavily. But also, I feel like this can be a little bit of a controversial topic because everyone has their own ideas for how they think a job should work and how they should be treated at their job, and sort of the methods at which they think are what you need to do to become successful. And one of the things I've mentioned in the past is that I tend to be very analytical, and when things make sense, then that's more or less what I latch onto, right? Things seem to make sense in order for me to really kind of like believe in that thing. I don't believe in things that don't have some kind of reasoning or logic behind them, right? So religion is something that's extremely hard for me, especially considering my family is all religious, which can make connecting with family very difficult. But yeah, when being very analytical about a lot of things, I tend to look at things from a different perspective a lot of the time than a lot of people, and that is a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. It's a good thing because I can, in a lot of situations, look at something rationally and be like, oh, this, or do this, or this is sort of like the outcome. But it also is a bad thing because a lot of people, I have a lot of sort of, I don't want to say beliefs, but I look at things in a way that oftentimes is kind of confrontational, I guess. And with work, that's something, especially in the last few years, well, maybe not the last few years, but the last somewhere between 5 and 10 years has been really difficult for me when dealing with coworkers. So I guess to start in this topic, how about I just kind of give everybody a rundown on what I have done as far as jobs. I'm not going to give specific places, like names of places that I've worked, so I'm not completely outing myself, and so I'm not I'm not gonna have any of these companies like coming after me, but I will kind of talk about like the job title that I had, and sort of like the type of work it was, and then we can go into some detail after I've kind of explained the places I've worked, and then I can kind of go back through and we'll kind of talk about what that job experience was like, the pros and cons, and then we'll see how much time we can sort of eat up just talking about things like that. And then at the end we'll kind of go back through and I can talk about sort of maybe like how my work ethic has changed over the years, how my mindset at work has changed over the years, and sort of what I believe to be the right way to look at work, and what kind of mindset you might need to have in order to actually be successful. In my opinion, we'll say in my opinion, because I know that it's one of those things that a lot of people tend to look at in different ways. But yeah, so the first job I ever had was actually working in potato fields. It's I say I'm not good. I wasn't gonna say exactly what the job was that I was working, because I might out myself a little too much. And The job was roguing, and saying that might actually kind of out myself a little bit, because roguing is not something. Hold on a second, I got something in my eye. Roguing is not something that is well known or common in a lot of states, but where I live, roguing is a pretty common thing. But basically what roguing is a bunch of people walking up and down a potato field, and they're looking for diseased potatoes. Diseased potatoes, basically they just produce bad potatoes. In the best case scenario, a diseased potato plant will produce just smaller potatoes, but in most diseases that potatoes can get, you'll end up with like unusable potatoes. Like they're like, basically they rot. The potatoes under the ground will rot and turn into like these almost like balloons. Like the skin of the potato will still more or less be intact, but all of the potato inside just kind of turns into like a black crud. And it leads to some pretty funny scenarios, actually. People throwing rotten potatoes at each other, and like they explode and they smell like crap, and whatever. But yeah, so my first job, I was only 15 at the time, which technically, as I understand it, is you're not, like, you can't legally work at the age of 15. I think you have to be 16 in order. Right, or am I saying this backwards? Was I 14 actually? And 15 is, no, I think that's right. I think I was 15, but in order to legally work for a company, you have to be 16 years of age. But there was a loophole, because the way this company worked is the owner doesn't start getting paid by the farmers until like well, maybe not a few months, but it takes weeks or a month before he starts receiving money from the farmers that he can then use to pay his employees. So what he does is, people come and start working for him, and the job lasts 2 to 3 months. My first year doing it was 3 months. The second year I did it, it was I want to say it was only like 2, or 2.5. I can't remember. It's not hugely important. This is a long time ago. But he would pay everyone one big fat paycheck at the end. So you'd go and you'd do the job, and it was a great job for like high school students or just students in general, because you go out and you work in the potato field for 2 or 3 months during your break, which I guess that's something that's also not super common in other states too. But where I live, the schools actually let everybody out for a couple months. Like that, the break is timed during potato harvest, because a lot of farmers around here take their kids out of school to go and help with their potato farms during the harvest time, and so the schools all just let out at that time, and that's just how it works, right? And most of the time when you hear about kids getting out of school to go work in the like for farmers or whatever, they're usually picking potatoes, where there's like a potato line that runs by, and I've never actually done it, so I don't 100% know, but I think you're just like picking out twigs and bad potatoes or something. But what I did was before that, and yeah, you walk up and down potato fields, and you have with a shovel, and then you're looking for these potatoes, and then you dig them out, and then you pretty much just throw them in the center. Like you dig it up and just lay it on the ground, and then it just sunbakes and kills the potato. But yeah, the boss would pay everybody one big fat paycheck at the end of like the 2 or 3 months. So my first paycheck at a job, I got a little distracted. I meant to say, oh hey, we got a viewer in chat. How's it going? How do I say your name? Misslaffy? Or is it Miss? Oh, it's Miss Leafy. I'm calling your name Miss Leafy. Sorry, Miss Leafy. Welcome to chat, Miss Leafy. Yeah, so we would get one big fat paycheck at the end of the 2 or 3 months. And because I was only 15, but I turned 16 before I got that paycheck, I could legally get around the whole, like, I wasn't old enough to work and like a job like this, right? So it was also kind of exciting, because my very first paycheck ever was like, I want to say it was like $2,500. Actually, I think that first year it was like 28. It was a lot, especially at the time, because this was back. Oh man, what year was this? 2004. This was like 2004. when minimum wage was like $5.15 an hour, and I got a $2,800 paycheck. I actually used that paycheck to buy my first vehicle. Paid $1,000 for it, bought it from bought it from my grandma, and that $2,800 not only bought that truck for me, but it also paid for insurance and gas and everything for that truck for like the whole year. And then next year I did that job roguing again, and that year wasn't as long, and I think my paycheck that year was only like $2,400. And after that second year, that was a rough year actually. I got bullied a lot that second year. It was actually, especially towards the end of the year, which ended up becoming a big problem for the boss, and he ended up firing all the people that were involved in that whole sort of like situation. Basically there was a bunch of us in this car, and they had all of like the sort of like worst employees in this car, and they were bullying a bunch of the new employees, and myself included, even though it was my second year. And he ended up firing like all the people that were involved in that whole bullying situation. But I was like, nah, screw this, like this is BS, I'm not coming back to this job. And I wanted a job that was more steady, that I could have a steady income, as opposed to working a job where I would only work, once a year and just take a fat paycheck. And so I left roguing and I went to work at fast food, which, Miss Leafy, how am I doing today? I am doing pretty good. Today is basically just a venting day. We're just going to kind of, for this first hour, we're basically just going to talk about jobs and work and stuff like that, which I'm pretty opinionated on because I've had some pretty bad jobs. But yeah, so the next job that I did in fast food is one of those jobs that everyone hates, right? Like no one likes fast food. And I actually didn't mind that job. I ended up keeping that job for, I want to say it was like 7 years I worked at that place. And then I quit, went to do another job for a year, and then I came back and worked about another year in this same place. So total, I put in about 8 years of work at this fast food place, which, looking back at it now, I'm really just, I guess, kind of just disappointed in myself, because that was a long time to work at a really crappy company. That was probably the worst job I've ever had, not because the job itself was especially hard, but because the owner was a crook. Like, he was an actual crook, right? Like, when I started working there, this is just a sign to show you, you got to look for these signs when you work anywhere, right? Like, and this was one of those signs that this is just a really bad place to work. But my coworkers told me that I need to be checking my time slips, right? And the way they have they used a time clock, and you would punch in and out, right? And my coworkers told me when I started working there that you should be checking your time slips, right? Make sure that they're right. And I just like, yeah, whatever. I probably worked there for 5 years without ever checking my time slips. I would just go in and work and get my paycheck every 2 weeks. And then I started checking them, and I don't actually remember why I first started checking them, but I decided to start checking them. And it's actually very, very simple to add up your pay stub, right? Because it gives you your clock in time and your clock out time. And it's literally as simple as taking your clock out time and minusing it from your clock in time, and that tells you how many hours you've worked, right? So I started adding them up, and I remember why I first checked. I first checked because I had this one pay period where I worked a ton, right? And like that, my boss, specifically my manager needed a lot of help, and so I came in and worked, I want to say it was like 2 whole extra shifts on top of like my 32 or 34 hours I would normally work. And so I ended up getting almost 10 hours of overtime, or I was supposed to. That's like big caveat here. I was supposed to get like 10 hours or almost 10 hours of overtime on that paycheck. And so I was like, I really should make sure that this one, like, so I added up the hours on that pay stub, and sure enough, like when I got my paycheck, it was short a lot. Like it was very short. Like basically he cut pretty much all my overtime off of that paycheck and just didn't pay me for it, right? Which is a massive freaking punch in the gut. I was was pissed. And so I went into work, and I was like, you know, I don't think this is right. You're missing a ton of hours. Like, I worked way more hours than this. And I tried going in after the lunch rush, but he played it off like, I can't believe he's doing this right now. We're busy. We got all these customers. And it was like, yeah, but your lunch rush should have ended like 30 minutes ago. Like, they don't need you. You can fix this error. And he came back out after like making me wait for like forever, right? I swear I was sitting in there for like an hour waiting for him to figure this out. And he comes back out and he was like, well, your math was wrong or something or whatever, but it is wrong. And he ended up only paying me for like 6 hours of overtime instead of like, and I was like, I don't understand how my math was wrong. And I went back through it like 3 times. And I mean, it's really simple math. It's literally just minus the 2 and you get the hours for that shift, and you just do that for all your shifts and then add them together. It's literally just adding and subtracting. It's not hard math. And so taxes, maybe, I don't know, but that also just seems messed up. That, yeah, I don't know, I was pretty pissed about it. But yeah, that was sort of the first sign for, well, I guess not actually the first sign. I mean, the coworkers that first originally told me you need to be checking your pay stubs, they were gone by this point. At this point, I was pretty much the most experienced employee that was there, other than the manager. But so I started getting in the habit of checking every pay stub, every single one, and they were wrong basically every single time by about 2 hours. Like, every single one of my paychecks was 2 hours short, and it was like I didn't really want to confront him about it, and so I didn't at first, but I started getting basically every paycheck I would check, and I was starting to get really irritated. So my solution, instead of having to confront him every time I got paid, I started doing the addition on my pay stubs. Like, I started like this shift, you know, the out time or the in time minus by the out time, that comes out to, I don't know, 5.75 hours, right? So I would write 5.75 between those 2 shifts, go to the next one. And I did that all the way down the pay stub, and then I add them all together and just put a line at the bottom, you know, equals, and then write the total number of hours, right? Doing this, he stopped skimping my hours nearly as much, but he was still doing it, which is something that absolutely blows my mind, because even writing my hours on my pay stub, he was still shaving a little bit off. It was usually like half an hour or less than half an hour, but he was still shaving a little bit off of my paychecks. Now, you could say, oh, well, that's taxes. No, I'm literally adding the hours, and when you get your pay stub, it says the total number of hours you worked. He was just shaving them for, like, it's such simple, easy math, right? Like, this isn't like a tax thing either. This is literally just, he's just cutting my hours, and it was so painfully obvious. I'm actually kind of really mad at myself for not legally going after him. I'm pretty sure I could have got like a lawyer and just kept, like, basically just worked there for a year and just keep every pay stub and add up every pay stub and do all that and document everything. And I probably could have gone to a lawyer and just been like, hey, this is what he's doing, and he's doing this to 25 employees, right? And I convinced a few of my employees to check their pay stubs, and they noticed that theirs were getting shaved a couple of hours per pay period as well. And I was like, when you add that up, if he's shaving 2 hours off of 25 different employees' pay stubs, that comes out to a crap ton of money, right? For him, obviously. And yeah, that was yeah. Anyway, so me calling the owner a criminal, like, he is actually a criminal, like it was really bad. So after working there for, I want to say it was 6 or 7 years, I left, and I ended up doing 2 different jobs. Not at the same time, but I didn't want to work at that place anymore, obviously. And I'd already given them way more time than they should have. But I went and did, let's see, I did a construction delivery job. But the company I worked for, basically they would source supplies for local construction sites, and they would get delivered, and then we would just deliver them to the different construction sites. So it was things like doors and door frames and windows. We delivered a lot of like windows and glass panes and things like that, and like trim. But that was pretty much it. And so I would basically go to work in the morning, and there would be a truck that would have dropped off stuff either early that morning or sometime It's usually, I want to say it was usually early in the morning, and so we would just go to the location, and there would just be these supplies just sitting on the lot, and we had a forklift there, and we'd get the forklift, load the things onto these like glass like rack style trailers, and then we would I say we, it was me and one other person, and we each had our own truck. But yeah, we just load them up on these trailers, and then we would just drive them to the site and unload them onto the ground, and that was it. And we didn't have a forklift to unload, so we'd usually have to get to the location, and they'd be like shrink wrapped or like saran wrapped or whatever. We'd cut that off, and then we would just pull the doors off one by one or two by two, and stack them on the location wherever the site wanted. Or if there wasn't people there, we'd just try and stack it somewhere that wasn't gonna like get damaged and they could see it. And yeah, and that was it. And the job itself wasn't really that big of a deal, except that my coworker was kind of incompetent, and he did stupid things and made a lot of mistakes often, and I didn't want to say anything about it because this guy was the owner's son. And so eventually he made a big mistake, and the owner got pissed, right? His dad got pissed, and he came over and was getting all like lecturing and like telling him you're not securing the loads properly, and like he was fuming. He was yelling and screaming, and he was out of his mind. And that made me pissed off, because all of these things he was pissed off about were his own son's fault, and I'm the one sitting here getting lectured for it. And so I broke my phone. I was so pissed off, I just threw my phone on the ground and it exploded. It was a Samsung Ericsson, and I freaking chucked that thing at the ground like full strength, and it just exploded into pieces all over the parking lot. And he saw that and was like, oh shit, like I took it too far. And yeah, I quit shortly after that. If not then, I actually might have just quit right then. I don't remember. And then yeah, and then I took a roofing job. I want to say after I quit that job, how long was I unemployed for? It wasn't very long, probably just like a month. And then I got this roofing job, and I actually had to travel. So I live on the West Coast, and I had to fly all the way over to the East Coast, and I worked in Maryland and Virginia, and that was kind of cool. That was the first time I'd done any real big traveling. But yeah, that job was interesting. That job was interesting because I wasn't doing normal roofing. Like when you hear about roofing, you think about the people putting I don't know if I want to call them slats. What would those be called? I just realized it. Yeah, but it wasn't. Well, the type of roofing I was doing was slate roofing. So it's basically just these big like rock slates that you would place on the roof, and they have two little holes in the top, and you would use copper or stainless steel nails. We always use copper nails, and just boom boom, right? And then you just work your way across, and then you go down and work your way across, and you just keep installing these. I said down, you'd go up. I'm trying to remember. You start at the bottom of the roof and work your way up. Is that right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah, we did, and that the job, like that kind of stuff did kind of suck, but I mean, it wasn't the worst thing. The thing that actually sucked the most about that job was just that the owner was actually pretty lazy, and he hired employees to basically do the job for him, and he only ever really came up to do the technical things. Like when we get to the top, he oftentimes would like do the peak, because it's got to be done in a specific way, and you got to like put this metal down, or he would do like corners or like edges and stuff like that. But we did everything else, and yeah, he mostly just operated not the crane. What was that thing called? The brand was like Genie, but it's basically a lift thing. Yeah, anyway, but there was just him, and he hired me and two other high school students. I wasn't a high school student at the time, to clarify, but it was just the four of us. And then he hired this woman who was questionable. I wasn't really sure why he hired her, but it seems that he hired her because he just wanted to help her out. And then a little later, I find out that she was actually a prostitute that he liked, basically. And he just hired her to help her out. And, you know, it was this whole thing. But I ended up leaving that job because I got a bit romantically involved with this girl, and the owner really, like I said, liked her, but she had no feelings for him. She was only doing the job because she needed some money. And yeah, there was basically, I had a falling out with the boss, and I was just like, all right, well, I'm going back home. So he dropped me off the airport, and I flew home the next day. That was I can talk about that a little bit more later, but that was crazy. That's probably one of the craziest ways I've ever left a job. But let's see, after that, I actually went back to Taco Time because I came back home, I didn't have a job, and I needed some money. And so I just went back to Taco Time and helped him out for, I want to say it was about a year. I worked there again. And funny story, that boss is so lazy, he never actually like did any of the like paperwork to unemploy me, so I was still on his books like that whole time. And so it was pretty, I just literally just went, but they just started putting me on the schedule. I just came in and started helping out. But yeah, that was a interesting situation. But I went from that to retail. So at this point, I've done potato fields, I've done fast food, I've done roofing. I did a little bit of construction, probably the easier side of construction because I wasn't actually doing any of the construction work. And then now I'm going into retail. Man, my work history is kind of diverse, isn't it? Retail was not that bad. I worked at this place for 5 years, and the thing that everyone complains about, or the things I always hear people complain about when it comes to retail, is always the customers, like having to deal with customers. And I actually liked dealing with the customers. To be totally honest, that was probably the best part about the job. When people tell me that, or when people complain about customers, specifically in retail, but just in general, I always tell them that the customers isn't that bad. You don't know who the people are going to be or what they're going to be like, and anytime you're ever dealing with strangers, you always just kind of want to err on the safe side. And I always just kind of assume that they're stupid, right? Because it is every day at work customers would ask you stupid questions, like, and it's just you just deal with it. And once you kind of understand that, it makes dealing with customers kind of extremely easy, right? Like, it's just a matter of, I don't want to say you treat them like children, but you kind of have that mindset of like, oh, just be nice and help them with their issues, and then they'll be gone, kind of a thing, right? And so dealing with customers, I found to be actually quite easy. But when you have stupid coworkers, that's far, far, far worse. Dealing with annoying, rude, abrasive, or stupid coworkers is way worse because you have to deal with them every day, or at least pretty frequently, because they work there, right? And that, oh man, I had some stupid coworkers when I worked in retail. Holy crap. I'll talk a little bit more about that later when I kind of go through and talk about some of the stuff I learned. But yeah, that job wasn't really that bad, but the pay was bad. Largely because I started out as a photo tech, right? So this retail store had a photo center. I say had because a lot of that stuff is kind of discontinued now. So now their photo center is basically just a copy center. But I started out as a photo tech, and I would develop film and help customers with photo related things. And I'm a relatively tech savvy person, and so I know, or at least was able to learn a lot about specifically photo related things like cameras and stuff like that, and like printers and printing. And I've got some really cool stuff to teach you guys about that stuff. I got pretty passionate about that, actually. Well, they sort of closed their photo center. Like, they still do photos and that kind of stuff, but they got rid of that role, the designated role for a photo tech. But my boss didn't like the idea of, like, basically everyone was being trained to work over there. And the store's idea, the corporate store idea, was that they make the photo center so easy to run that you don't need to train personnel just to run it. But that did not work very well. That actually didn't work very well at all. And so my boss still basically had me as the role of head photo tech. even though the store didn't technically have that role. And so I became a CSA, or customer service associate, which is just their introductory role, basically, where you go into retail. A CSA is just like the person at the cashier, right? So I was basically just a glorified customer service associate. Well, shortly after they sort of dissolved that role, my boss started training me to become a shift lead, or a supervisor. And I did that role for like 3 years. Yeah, I want to say it was like 3 years. I was in a leadership position, and even being in a leadership position, I still wasn't like getting paid that great. I want to say I was getting paid $13 an hour as a shift lead. Keep in mind, at this point, I have been trained in the photo center. I have been trained to run like the registers and all that stuff. I've been trained to do the beauty center because they sell cosmetics, and I've been trained to do all of the stuff on the floor, like all like this. Oh, and receiving, like I do receiving. I could do. They call it 1506, but basically it's the process of throwing stuff away, right? Anything that like, if a customer returns something and is broken and we accept the return, we can't resell that item, so we have to throw it away. But it's on our books, it's on our system, so we have to scan it out and throw it in either the dumpster, or like they have controlled ways of throwing away chemical stuff, whatever, right? I was trained to do all that stuff, and I was, I could run the store by myself, right? The manager would leave, and I'd run the store by myself. And when I first started there, they had I almost want to say a vice principal, but it's not vice. It's the manager and the, not co-manager. What is the manager in training? We'll say manager in training. I don't remember what the official title for that role was, but they had one, but he quit about 3 years into me working there. I actually don't think he quit. I think he transferred to another store, but it's not really important. No, I actually think he did quit. Yeah, I think he did quit. I think their plan was to transfer him, but it wasn't happening, and so he ended up quitting and going to a different company. But yeah, but for those last like couple years that I worked there, it was just me. It was just the manager and basically me. And he had hired other shift leads, and was going to try and train one of them to become the assistant store manager, but then she went into the pharmacy and worked in the pharmacy, and so he started training another guy, but then he never ended up doing it. And so the crazy part too is all these other shift leads and people that he was bringing in that needed trained, I was training them, right? And that was a slap in the face. And then I found out one of them was getting paid more than me. I found they did transferred another coworker from another store to our store, and this person, all they did, and this is all they wanted to do, but all they would do was run the beauty department, right? And that's all they wanted to do. They had zero interest, and anytime they would get scheduled with someone else, they would refuse it. They wouldn't run the front register, they wouldn't go to the phone, right? So they would only do beauty. And this person was getting paid like $2 an hour more than me. And I'm like, what kind of bullcrap is that, right? Like, I do everything in the store and I'm good at it. My boss trusts me and relies on me. And then I got the performance review for that year, and I did not get a raise. Like, I got no raise at all, right? And my boss claims that it's because I'm close to the limit for my position anyway. So like, I'm like, man, this is such a freaking stupid. I also got skimped out of my first raise too, because the very first year I worked there, it was so close to their performance review time that I didn't get a. No, that's not what it was. That what it was is when my first performance review came, I got the performance review and it was supposed to come with a raise, but then the company as a whole raised what they were paying all of their employees, and that overrided my performance review. So instead of my performance review stacking on top of this, I basically just went up a dollar. Oh man, it's such a freaking stupid corporate places suck. But yeah, eventually after working there for 5 years, I was just fed up, and I want to say it was actually in December. I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I just couldn't work there anymore. And a large part of the reason was just pay, right? Like I felt I was, other than like the new employees that started working there, I was like one of the lowest paid people there. And it was, I probably should mention this too. I was also trained to work in the pharmacy. The position they call it was a designated hitter, but basically I was a pharmacy technician, but I was a sales floor associate. So I would work on the sales floor, and if they needed extra help, I would also help in the pharmacy. But that didn't come with a pay bump. And that job was just the way that corporate treated its employees and did pay and stuff like that was just ridiculous. So eventually, yeah, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And I actually called my family and I was like, hey, I can't do this job anymore, right? And I don't know what to do. And so I was basically just asking for advice, and the advice my mother gave me was like, quit. If you can't do it, quit. Right? Like, worst case scenario, if you can't find another job, is you move out of your apartment and you just move back in with us. That's fine, right? And we'll help support you until you can get something else. And I was like, that's one of the things where there's a lot of things my family does that I'm not on board with, largely the religious stuff. But like, that is probably like one of the coolest things ever, though, is with my parents are just like so supportive when it comes to that kind of stuff, I guess. Yeah, anyway, so yeah, I just quit. We got another person in chat. Neko Princess, how's it going? But yeah, so after, and so it was pretty much like mid-December, I want to say, and I just quit. Just like, nope, not doing this job anymore. And so it was actually, it was so great actually, because this is probably the proudest way I've ever left a job. But my boss came back, and I had just finished the phone call with my family, and he comes back, and he was done for the day, ready to go home. He was pretty excited to be done with his shift, and this is right before the holidays, so he was required to work like a lot more hours because of the holidays, like which is just, that's another one of those signs where it's like, if a company is going to exploit employees like this, then they're probably not running their company very well. But yeah, he came back and was, how you doing? And he's putting his stuff away, ready to go. I was like, I don't know, I'm not really doing that good. He's like, oh really? Why is that? And I was like, I just don't want to work here anymore. And I took off my name tag, handed it to him, and I walked out. And I'm so proud of this, because A, that job just sucked and I was so ready to be out, and I just quit. And B, I know that sucks for him, because now that I've quit, he's got to go through all the work on the computer system. So now he doesn't get to go home. So now he had to stay late that day because of me. But also, I quit right before Christmas, and so now he's got to figure out how to do all the stuff that he needs to do without me, right? And I was just like, and so I just took, basically, I want to say it was like 2 weeks. I just like took 2 weeks off work, and I enjoyed Christmas with my family, and I didn't worry about looking for jobs, and I just took a break, and it was awesome. And then we got Remy in chat too. Welcome, Remy. Let's see, where did I go after that? Oh, I went to work for another food place, but this time I didn't go to fast food. I went to a restaurant, and I learned some really important stuff about this. A restaurant is just a glorified fast food place. It's honestly basically exactly the same. As far as behind the scenes go, it's not that much different than fast food, as far as a working environment goes. But that one actually started out pretty good. The boss seemed super optimistic. When I was doing my interview, I straight up told her, I was like, I need to make more money, right? Like, my last job didn't work out because they just weren't willing to pay me a living wage. And so my whole goal is to just try and make more money, right? I need to get into a position where I can start making like $50,000 a year, right? These fluffy jobs that are happy just keeping you at $24,000 or $25,000 a year and just don't cut it, right? And they were totally cool with that. And so I was like, and then they hired me anyway, and I'm just like, I was painfully honest, I felt like, in that interview. And so I was really optimistic that this company actually had that goal in mind. It was wanting to move me up into something that would pay decent, and then they never did. They kind of always kept me paid under what they should have been paying me. I had a bunch of coworkers that were getting paid more than me, and that job largely would pay employees more if they complained more. Like, going to the boss and basically complaining a lot and threatening to leave was how people were getting raises at that job. And that's not my mentality. I don't want to have to go to my boss and be like, if you don't pay me $1 more an hour, I'm going to quit, right? I found another job, I'm going to quit. Which I technically actually did do once at that job, but I did find another job and told them I was going to leave, and they were pretty upset about me potentially leaving and offered to pay me the same amount. And I was like, oh, I'll look into. And then I ended up not taking this other job. I didn't take the other job because this job wanted to pay me more. I didn't take the other job because it didn't work out, but I did accept that pay raise, obviously. But But yeah, I can talk a little bit more about that job in a minute. The last job, the job I'm currently working at, is a fabrication shop. Basically, they just make these big, huge stainless steel machines that are for different farmers or different purposes or whatever. And they hire all different types of people. Like they've got laser operators, polishers, brake press operators, which is the current title that I have, fabricators, welders, drafters, salesmen, like they have a sales office. And yeah, it's like anytime I get a new job, I'm always super optimistic about the job, and I'm always looking at the positives of the job. But this job has a ton of red flags. This job has more red flags than I think any previous job I've worked at. But the first real big red flag is when I applied and first got the job. I was trying to push that I would like to get into something dealing with computers, right? The 3D modeling or getting into some kind of drafting or something like that would ideally be what I want. And they made it seem like, oh, we actually have some openings there. We're actually looking for some people. We'll have to talk to the head of that department and find out what he wants to do. But then I had also made a comment that my brother was going into welding, and that was another potential thing that I had been looking at, because welders actually get paid not horribly. They get paid pretty decent. And so learning that's another thing. And that was what they heard. They actually didn't care at all about me potentially being a drafter or working on computers. They just threw me straight at the oh, hey Francis is in chat. Yep, I'm here. But yeah, so they ended up making me a polisher, which is like the lowest position that they offer at this company. And they only offered me $15 an hour. No, 14. They only offered me $14 an hour. And at my previous job at a restaurant, I was actually getting paid 16. And so that was a real kick to the balls. But I ended up taking it anyway because I wanted to get out of food, because that place was starting to decline and sort of like what's the word I'm going for? Their management structure was deteriorating heavily, and they were having some pretty bad managers that were just bad at their job but also treated people like crap, and it was getting out of control. And so I was pretty ready to get out of that job. But also I was really hopeful, because this company has so many positions and so many opportunities. I was hoping that, give it a year, I should be able to get out of this position and I could work myself up into something that pays a lot more, right? And that was that initial "we're going to pay you $14 an hour" offer was the first really big kick to the balls. That was the first really big red flag that I should have been like, actually, I really should have tried negotiating, to be honest. I probably should have just countered and just been like, yeah, I'm not taking this job for less than 16. They probably would have given me 16. Is that a mirror? Yeah, there's a mirror behind me. I thought it gave kind of a cool effect. But yeah, so that's where I'm currently working. So let's kind of talk about sort of. I talked a bunch about that first job and kind of told you guys a lot about it, but let's kind of talk about like what I learned from each of these jobs and sort of like how my work ethic has changed and like from all these different jobs, right? So the fast food job, those kind of jobs are often seen as like low-end introductory jobs. I would argue that is a horrible way to look at them. I feel like as a minimum standard, we need to as specifically in the US, I don't actually think this is a problem in other countries, but at least in the US, we really need to be looking at these low-end jobs as, yeah, they might be low-end jobs, but that doesn't give them the excuse to not pay a living wage. Right? Like they need to, the standard for these jobs is so absolutely bare minimum low that we treat these employees like absolute dog shit and we pay them the same way, and it's absolutely atrocious. It's so horrible. It is extreme. The way that these people get treated in fast food is akin to slavery. Like people treat them like they don't have any rights. It's the owners, the customers, everything, right? And it's just, don't work in fast food. Like just don't. Like just you'd be better off living under a bridge than working in fast food and getting treated like human garbage. It is absolutely horrible. That's sort of what I learned when it came to oh, and then I actually glazed over. I didn't talk about the whole roguing. I learned that actually, I don't know. What did I learn from roguing? I got bullied that last day that I worked there. That was pretty annoying. I guess I kind of learned that you don't put up with shitty coworkers, I guess. That was probably one of the worst days I've ever worked. It's pretty bad. I meant to grab my lozenges before starting, so I got stuck on a lozenge while we were talking, and I forgot. But it's all right. We're getting close to the end anyway. Fast food. Working in fast food, I also was like, I guess you could say from that job, I really learned that you need to document everything, right? Like if your boss is doing something that you suspect is illegal, try and get any kind of hard evidence and save it, right? Like start keeping your pay stubs or start getting everything documented and hang on to it, because legally you can really screw up these people if you have the opportunity. But if you're not documenting everything, it's not going to help. And that's another thing that I learned too, was don't do anything verbally, right? Like at all. Like everything needs to be through like a text message or an email. The roofing job, that was just kind of a crappy job. Construction, don't work for a family-owned business is kind of what I learned from that, because it's really complicated, and it's like the family is the family, and if you're not part of the family, it becomes a really sort of like weird metric. I guess I did forget to talk about firefighting. I did firefighting for a little while. I was a volunteer fireman. That was not horrible, actually. I didn't do that for very long. And I did that on the side of my existing. What job was I doing at the time? I was doing another job at the same time, but I don't remember what it was. It was one of these jobs I was talking about. Retail. I learned a lot from retail. The big thing I learned when working in retail that is sort of like one of the biggest things that I can teach others, that I can share with others, is sort of respect yourself, I guess. Like you need to, like, let's say a coworker calls you and they want you to cover their shift and you don't want to. Tell them no. That's it. That's all you have to tell them. Tell them, sorry, I'm not working that shift for you. That's it. This is actually something that was huge when I worked in fast food. People make up stupid excuses to get out of work, and I don't understand it. Like, people would call out sick. Like, that's a big one. People call out sick, right? And so, like, you'll have employees. This happened a lot in retail and in food, but people would call. Oh, and then the company. Oh, this is actually super irritating too. The companies would be like, it's your job to get your shift covered. It's like, bitch, no, it's not. You're the manager. That's like your title. You're supposed to manage, right? If I can't come into work, I can't come into work. Why is it my responsibility to get my own shift covered, right? Like, you're the one who this affects, right? Like, you need to get that shift covered. It's literally your job title, right? I hated that. When I worked in retail, I refused to do it. That's because when I worked in fast food, they would be like, you have to get your shift covered. It's your job. And it was impossible. And so you end up working shifts. Like oh, this is so bad. I worked basically every time I would get sick and I was working in fast food, I worked sick every time I got sick, right? I don't know how much sickness I could have potentially spread, but I always worked sick, right? Because no one wanted to cover shifts. So I couldn't get my shift covered, so I would just come in and work, right? And it was great too, because there was a few shifts where I came in and I was pissed. Like, I was so sick, right? I guess pissed isn't the right word. That's what you say when you're drunk. But I was absolutely wasted sick. Like I was so bad. And my boss was like, why are you here? And I was like, I tried to get my shift covered, but no one would cover it. So I have to work. And he didn't want to get someone to cover. So I ended up working through the lunch rush. And then they sent me as soon as things started to slow down. Right. And so I'm working through the busiest rush of the day. And I'm like literally so sick. I'm like, oh man, it was so bad. Right. But yeah, that was a big learning thing for me. Is it's just like, if you can't work or you don't want to work, don't work, period. Right. Like obviously if you do this enough, they're going to end up letting you go or firing you or something. But so like, constrain yourself, I guess, if you want to keep the job. But if someone calls you and they're like, oh, I'm sick, I need you to cover for me, and you're not willing to do it, tell them no. Don't make excuses. Right. That's one of the things that like irritates me the most is, oh, I actually can't. I've got a class, or I'm actually with family right now, or they can tell you're lying. Honestly, just be honest. It's just like, if they're like, I need you to work, and just be like, oh, sorry, I can't. And then you're just like, oh, why? Right. You always get that. Why can't you? Because I don't want to. That's all they need to know. They don't need to know more, right? That's another thing too, is don't treat your coworkers like friends. Like they are not. I cannot tell you how many times I've been backstabbed by supposed people I got along with really well at work, right? It's just not, you just absolutely cannot be friends with coworkers. It is not a thing at all. And then the whole family metric too. Oh, we're a family. Yeah, we're a family that exploits their children for freaking money and treats them like crap and makes them work ridiculous hours. That's not a family. That's freaking slavery. Oh man, dude, I'm. You can tell I'm getting a little heated. Let's see. Yeah. So that's a big thing I noticed when I was working. That's actually what when I worked at that restaurant. That's actually what I did. People would. It's actually a great thing. People would call me to try and get me to cover their shifts, and I would just tell them no, straight up. Right, and just leave it at that, and people stopped calling me, which is great because I was already working more hours than I wanted to, and so picking up extras. Oh, that's the other thing too, is it's like I always told people, it's like if someone needs me to cover their shift, I'm willing to do it so long as they're willing to take one of mine, because I only want to work a certain number of hours, and if I'm taking people's shifts, I'm working way more hours than I want, right? But if they're willing to trade shifts, like, oh hey, I need you to work my shift tomorrow, I'd be like, oh sure, can you take my shift on Friday? And they'd just be like, blah, 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 excuse. And I tell them, well, if you can take my shift on Friday, then I'll work for you tomorrow. But otherwise, no. Right? Like, oh, well, why not? You can. I'm like, because I don't want to. I only want to work a certain number of hours, and you're trying to get me to pick up an extra 8. No, thank you. I don't want to pick up an extra 8. People just stopped calling me, which was great. I loved that people stopped. Like it's great too once people kind of stopped talking or contacting me, trying to get me to cover their shifts, because I would hear about shifts that weren't getting covered, and I'm like, I was off that day. Like I totally could have covered that shift, but again, you need to, pay it forward. I guess, I don't know. Take one of my shifts, whatever. Oh man, that's a huge thing. Like just don't. If you don't want to work, don't work. That's basically all that there is to it, right? Obviously, if you're, again, not taking any shifts, then they're going to fire you. So work some, but yeah, if you're having a bad day or you're feeling sick, call out. If they're going to get angry about it, then they're not very successful keeping employees, I guess. I don't know. Let's see. What was it? I talked about roofing, construction, retail. My current job, my current job is a piece of, we're going to talk about the red flags in my current job. There was that first one I told you about where they only offered me $14 to start. I'm actually getting $15 now, which by the way is bad. If any of you are getting paid less than $15 an hour, you should probably just quit, because 15 is absolutely atrocious. I'm trying to quit my current job. It's actually, I had a little bit of a really annoying thing happened when I was working on Thursday, which is the last day of the last day of the week that I work. I work Monday to Thursday, 10-hour shifts. My coworker likes to talk a lot, and he likes to not work, basically. And so I'm not going to work harder than him. This guy's worked at this company for like 30 years. He's getting paid significantly more than I am, right? And when he just goes over to a coworker and just starts talking about something, I'm not going to sit here and start doing his job for him. I'm only getting paid 15, like screw you. So I just pull out my phone, and I've actually been applying to just about any job I can find. So I've been spending a lot of time on LinkedIn and a lot of time on Indeed. And when he walks over and just starts talking to someone, it'll be 15 minutes before he comes back. So I'll just spend 15 minutes browsing these websites, trying to find jobs and applying to different jobs. Well, on Thursday, he wanders off. He says, I'm going to go to the bathroom. He just wanders off and starts talking to this guy. And I'm like, well, he's talking to such and such, so he's probably going to be like 15 minutes. So I pull out my phone and started updating my LinkedIn profile. Mainly because my LinkedIn profile was sending me way more messages. Like every time you search something on LinkedIn, you get an email notification for that search. And like every day it sends you, it's kind of ridiculous. So I was trying to fix that. And he comes back after like, I don't know, 20 minutes or whatever, and gets mad because I need to show more initiative and I need to be more productive. And this is coming from the guy who's all constantly talking, and like I was like, this is freaking bullshit. I cannot believe that this guy is lecturing me about being productive, right? And so we do 2 breaks and a lunch break, right? So we have a break at like 9:30, we have lunch at noon, and then we have another break at like 2:30. When that first break came at 9:30, I just went over to, I don't know if it's my boss or if it's like my team lead, probably my team lead. So I just went to my team lead and I was just like, hey, can I leave early today? And he was like, yeah, sure. And I was like, all right, cool. And then I just went over, put my stuff away, and told that coworker I'm leaving, and then I left. Didn't tell him any reason why. I was just, and if they would have asked, I would just said I don't want to be here, and I just left and I went home. I was like, screw it. Like I'm not gonna sit here and do his job for him when he's getting paid the money to do it. Oh, but he's getting paid for his experience, and I'm getting paid for slave? Like, I don't understand. It's freaking bullcrap. It's such a load of bullcrap. But yeah, anyway, so we're already at like an hour. Holy crap. There's certain things that when I talk about them, I can talk and talk and talk. But that's my work history. I kind of wanted to tell you guys about my work history because I feel like it's important to know, so that you know that my opinions when it comes to work actually have some sort of a foundation to them. But the sort of like things that I wanted to express to anyone who actually cares to listen would be work ethic. And I would say that work ethic is one of those things that well, there's work ethic, work mindset, and sort of like a side note on work mindset is like what I think is important to actually start making a decent amount of money, right? But my work ethic over the years has largely changed because I have been getting nothing but taken advantage of, and I can't anymore, right? Like I'm tired of not being able to live comfortably at all, and all these companies don't see the problem, right? Like my job recently wanted to try and increase employee morale because they're losing employees like hotcakes and not retaining any employees. And so they had this whole meeting about it, and they decided that everyone needs toasters. So in all the break rooms, they put a fucking toaster. A toaster. That's like the meme about fixing employee morale with a pizza band-aid, right? Like the pizza party band-aid, like, oh, we're having a pizza party, like that's somehow supposed to make everyone's life so much better when they can't afford to pay their bills. Like, yeah, this company it's falling into all those stupid caveats. So yeah, my work ethic is really just like, you know, I worked at my last job, worked at a restaurant. I only worked there for a year. This job, I still haven't got to a year. Like I've been working at this job. I was working at this job for like 3 months and noticing a lot of big problems with the company. At 6 months, I was pretty active on job websites trying to get a new job. And right now, I think I'm at 8 or 9 months, and I don't think I'll make it to a year. I'm pretty sure I'll be out of this. I mean, I would have already been out of this company if someone hired me. I did get a job offer to this one place, but it wasn't good enough to move all the way across the country because they wanted me to move to the East Coast. But There's a phrase that I heard a little while ago, talked about what was it called? Basically, employees nowadays, the newer generations, are just constantly job hopping, and the idea being that if you want your pay to go up, you have to switch jobs, because jobs will hire you at a enticing amount of money, and that amount of money is oftentimes more than what they're paying their current employees, and then they just don't give you raises, and they barely give you raises, or they give you small little whatevers. And the idea is that once you start working there, you won't leave because you don't like switching jobs, you don't like job hunting, and so you have to basically just keep switching jobs. And that's largely what I'm starting to get into now. It's just like, oh, this company is only willing to pay me this, and I'm gonna leave. And just kind of just, I'm at the point now where it's like, until a job can get to where it pays me like $50,000 a year, I won't stay there, right? Like, if a job won't pay me that amount of money, then I'm just going to quit and go to the next one. And I'm going to keep doing it until I can find a job that actually pays me a reasonable amount of money. Yeah, anyway, so work mindset for me, I guess this is kind of a rolling into like work mindset. That's something that's changed for me a lot over the years too, because I'm not willing to give like 110% anymore. I'm not willing to come into my job and do extra, because the job is going to take advantage of me and do whatever it can to sort of like skimp from me, to try and line its own pockets. And so I'll come in and I just kind of do the bare minimum now, because it's not worth doing extra when they're not going to reward you for extra, right? It's the whole idea of going into work and being a diligent, hardworking employee, and the company will reward you for it, is dead. Companies just absolutely do not care about whether one employee is really good. It's like if you have a really good employee and then they have like a slacking employee, this person's not going to get paid more. The company will give them compliments and tell them what a good job they're doing, and maybe give them like, I don't know, possibly bonuses. That's like best case scenario. They'll give them bonuses, or like gifts or whatever, but they're not going to pay them more, right? They're just going to keep paying them crap, and that's so bad. But this kind of goes into something I heard recently. Not recently, I actually heard this years ago, and it really changed a lot about how I think when it comes to work. But the difference between someone who is rich and someone, well, okay, I don't want to say the difference between someone who's rich and someone who's poor, but something that a lot of rich people have in common is that they don't work for money. They make money work for them, right? The easiest example I can give of this is investing, right? Like, taking money and investing into something to grow that money into more money is a way that you can make money work for you. The money, you're not doing any work to get that extra money, right? So thinking about making money work for you is a much better mindset, instead of having to work for money. Obviously, you have to get some money in order to do this, but pretty much everything I do now is how can I turn this into money. Like, for example, I bought my first 3D printer, which I bought a long time ago. I bought because I got like $1,000 or something in tax returns, and I wanted to buy something cool, and 3D printers were really cool, and so I bought a 3D printer, right? And that's how I used, back when I had more disposable income, it was fun to like buy things to mess around with them and experience them for them. But now I just bought a new 3D printer like a year ago, and it was significantly cheaper than the printer I first bought. But I was like, if this could make me money, maybe not like live off of money, but if I can get into 3D printing, because I like to do some 3D modeling and 3D design and stuff like that. And so if I could come up with something that I could design and print and sell, I could make money off of my printer, right? And my parents have a freeze dryer, and it stopped working, and they were trying to fix it for like a year without much success. And eventually they were just like, they got one of their friends in who does freeze drying as a business and looked at it, and basically he's like, I don't think it's something to do with their pump. So they just bought a new pump, a new vacuum pump for their freeze dryer, which, for those of you who don't know, a freeze dryer is basically like a refrigerated box that you put food into, things like candy or even just food, and it's got a vacuum pump attached to it, and so it like freezes the. Does it freeze the food? I actually don't know if it's refrigerated. It actually, you know what it probably does? I think the vacuum pump pulls such a strong vacuum that it freezes the chamber. But the point of it is, it pulls all the moisture out of food. So if you've ever had like a dehydrated food meal where you just add water, mix it up, and like wait, and then you have yourself a ready to eat meal, that's freeze drying, right? That's essentially, my parents bought one of those, and their original plan was to start freeze drying just a ton of different candies and foods and meals and things and sell them. And they've actually got a pantry full of these freeze dried packaged ready to eat meals, but they're not selling them yet. But the point, anyway, so my point is that they bought a new vacuum pump for this thing, and I know that 3D printing, you can 3D print molds, and then you can make things using those molds either out of like epoxy or like some kind of a rubber or latex or silicone or whatever. And so I thought, well, they have this vacuum pump, and the vacuum pump that they have is not a cheap vacuum pump. It's like a $300 vacuum pump, right? Not like top of the line, but it's also not cheap either. And I was like, they're just gonna throw it away, right? So I was like, can I have this vacuum pump, right? And my parents are like, sure. I mean, I don't care. We're not going to do anything with it. And I was like, sweet. Of course, it doesn't work properly, but I was like, maybe I can fix it. And I think I can. I was actually messing around with it yesterday, but it was great getting this vacuum. So I spent some money to buy a vacuum chamber, which is basically just a pot with an acrylic lid and a gauge on it. And if I can get this pump working, I could start 3D printing some trinket or something and then make a mold out of it, and then I can start pumping out something, right? I don't know exactly what. I saw a video recently where if you can 3D print something that's functional, you can sell it for a lot more because people are willing to pay a lot more for something functional. Whereas if you 3D print things like little toys and trinkets, people aren't willing to pay very much for them because it's not like, it's just a luxury item. So ideally, I'd like to just to try and find something I can 3D print that's functional. My Miata actually has this little card holder underneath the sun visor, and I had this idea that I could 3D print something that would slide into that card holder and it would come out from the sun visor, and you could use it to clip sunglasses on. Now, you could just go to the store and buy a sunglass clip and put it on the sun visor, but Miatas have really small visors, and they have they're convertible top, right? And so those, I don't really trust those sunglass clip things in there. I'm sure they would actually be fine, to be totally honest, but it does still kind of make me slightly nervous. But there's that card holder, which pretty much just holds a single like ID card, basically, right? So if I was to 3D print something that's got the same sort of dimensions as like a card, or even maybe a little bit thicker, so it would fit tight, I could make something come off of that with a clip on the end, and it could be a sunglass like clip, and it would be nice and rigid and whatnot, right? And I'm like, that's something I want to, and if I can design and make something like this, 3D printing it will take time, and it's got intricate shapes and whatever, or I could potentially make something like this out of like epoxy or I haven't really looked into exactly what I'd make it out of, but if I could make a mold and start pouring a bunch of these, right? Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that anytime I'm looking at buying anything, everything has become budget. Everything has become, how does this make me or save me more money? I invested in a washing machine because my apartment charges $5 for a load of laundry, right? But if I buy my own washing machine and put it in my apartment, which my apartment doesn't have hookups for it, so I had to buy a ventless washing machine. But I found out I had to pay, what did I pay? I paid $1,100 for my washing machine, but it's a washing machine and a dryer built into one machine. And it's like 2.4, I think it's 2.4 kilowatts for a load of laundry in this machine, which comes out to like, I want to say where I live, it was coming out to like 54 cents or 56 cents or something like that per load, right? fully done, right? And I'm just like, so that was like huge. I was like, yeah, I can buy that, and I'll stop wasting so much money on laundry. So it's like, it's really easy for me to justify buying something if I think it's going to save me money, or if I think there's potential to earn me money, right? And this largely comes from that mindset of making money work for you instead of trying to look for a way to make money. You also notice that I haven't really talked about education like at all through this, and that's largely because I have a high school diploma, but I never did any higher education, and that's a really tricky subject for me because on one hand, I see people who have gone to school and they're making decent money now, but at the same time, I've seen a lot of people who go to school and now they're in debt for the rest of their life. And it's like they might be making more money, but they're also paying off this debt that they won't have paid off until they're like 80 years old. And I'm like, I hate debt. Like, the debt I'm in right now is already far more than I want, and it's just a car payment, right? Well, it's a card payment, Twitch Prime, and Discord Nitro. Those are my three luxurious, I don't know if luxurious is the right word. Those are my three payments that like could be eliminated, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. Curious what you guys think. How do you guys feel about work and jobs, and like, what do you think is the right thing to do? Like, what's the right mindset? What's the trick to getting into a job that actually pays a reasonable amount of money? I've been applying to so many places and hearing back from so little of them, it's starting to become extremely demotivating. It's kind of actually, it's especially annoying too, because applying to different jobs, you never really know what kind of scheduling they're going to give you. And I really want to keep doing these videos, and I really want to keep streaming. But if my schedule changes too much, it might become a really difficult thing to do, especially if I have a job where the schedule changes all the time. Having a set day makes it so much easier to do my streams and do videos and whatever. I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, that's enough rambling from me. How about we go find some interesting videos to watch? I'll try and find some interesting stuff that we can go kind of like watch, hopefully related to jobs and working. But if it's all just a whole bunch of like motivational speeches and like whatever, then we'll probably end up just watching food videos or something. But anyway, yeah, that's enough ranting.
Yeah.
That's enough of our podcast. So yeah, let's go somewhere else, shall we? Let me pick up this set of his camera real quick.